We are starting today a new monthly series for now entitled Your Life, Your Choice, during which Dr. Kevin Lentin, who is a chiropractor, health and lifestyle consultant, as well as an intermediate life support paramedic, will be sharing many of the pearls of wisdom, as he calls them, that he's accumulated over 25 years in clinical practice. Good to have you back with us, Kevin.
Thank you.
Now, to those who are listening for the first time today, it's strange for us to be saying good to have you back, but you did a sort of a debut interview
yes.
with those horrible guys. I hope they're not listening.
Yeah, I agree with
EMT.
you though. No, they really are a great bunch of guys.
Do you still associate with them?
Very much so. They're a great bunch of guys that work in the paramedic field.
Yes.
And they do a really good job, so I'm very pleased to be associated with them.
We do miss you guys. I really do miss you. And so, of course, we're talking about Luke and Rob and Ian. They are so tied up, so busy at the moment that we've put them on hold just for now, but hopefully we'll be able to get them back at some stage or another. You've decided to call the series, Kevin, Your Life, Your Choice, with a question mark.
Yes.
Explain?
Well, really, it is a choice. Making the decision about whether one wants to have a life that is full, vibrant, healthy, exciting, is really a choice that one has to make at some point in time, because if one doesn't accept the responsibility yourself as an individual for making the correct choices along the way, and there are a whole bunch of different things that we're going to discuss in terms of making those choices, but essentially if one tries to adopt the process where I'm not actually in control, it's everybody else's fault out there, I have to blame somebody else because of this, and we have all sorts of excuses just really to save ourselves from carrying the can, so to speak. It's always good to make it somebody else's responsibility, and we're very good generally, as a general rule, to blame the boss, your wife, your husband, your job, even your children. Blame anybody, blame the country, blame the economy, blame anything, to save yourself from actually taking responsibility for making the correct choices.
Indeed. And we can sit here behind the microphone and do the show day in, day out, and the messages can go in one ear and out the other, or you could decide, you could make the choice to do something about the information that you're getting.
Absolutely. And one of the little sayings that I often recite to patients is that very often if you ask someone the question, do you believe that knowledge is power? Most people will say yes, in fact knowledge is power. Well, I actually don't agree with that. I believe that it's what you do with the knowledge that is really powerful. Because a lot of people have a lot of knowledge, but they don't use it appropriately, or they choose to just put it on the back burner. And of course, then that doesn't empower you in any way at all if you don't use the knowledge that you gain in all sorts of different spheres of life.
Indeed, absolutely. And so you say, and very, very true the statement is, Kevin, that those who have the courage to take full responsibility are the ones who seem to be more able to overcome adversity. Although by saying that, I would imagine you're not insinuating that it's easy sometimes,
no.
Or maybe all of the time.
No, very often this process of trying to stay ahead of the game, so to speak, does push one's boundaries. You have to make decisions. Often the decisions are not that comfortable, not difficult decisions, but just something simple like, what do I put in my mouth in terms of one's nutrition? It's not a difficult decision to make the choice between the lettuce leaf or the deep fried calamari, but oftentimes we don't find it quite so easy to make that decision as to which one to take. But really what I'm going to try and do over the next little while, and if you'll have me back, that'll be wonderful, is to introduce the concept of a toolkit. And I think if one uses the analogies, and you'll probably hear me use a few analogies as we go on, but if you use the analogy of, say, a professional like an electrician or a plumber, if they go out to a job with their toolkit, they have to have all the bits and pieces in that toolkit in order to be successful in their particular job. And life is pretty much like that. In order to be successful in life, and I'd like to share with you my formula for success, but in order to be successful, you've got to have a toolkit that is fully equipped with all the actual basic building blocks that one would require to be successful. And success, obviously, for everybody is a different thing.
Means different things to different people.
But quite often we'll consider success more on a material, a material level. So if you have a nice car, and if you have a big house, and if you have lots of disposable income, and one considers that successful, but really that is quite shallow in terms of the true benefit. We know that there are many people that have all of those but are desperately unhappy.
Oh, yes.
And they are exposed to all sorts of trials and tribulations through their life. So the material wealth often doesn't count for much. It's nice, and I'm not saying anybody shouldn't have it, but again, it's what you do with the wealth. So success is, for me, something a little bit different. It's a fundamental concept, things like a state of inner peace. If you're in a state of inner peace where each day you wake up feeling fulfilled, feeling bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, feeling as though there's no conflict in your life, there's no need for anger and guilt and hatred and all those sort of things, that's a state, that's being successful in my view.
But we need to get to that point, Kevin, don't we?
Yes.
Through a process.
Absolutely. That's quite right. And the process begins, and that's my formula for success, that process begins with having a desire. So one has to have the innate desire to find the way to be successful. And quite often that's also quite difficult. I often hear in the clinic people saying, I just don't know what I want to do with my life. I don't know where I want to go. So it does require some sort of soul searching to determine what it is that you really want. What is missing in your life, relationship wise, financially wise, job wise? Why are those particular components not there? Once you've made that decision about the desire, it then takes a bit of work.
Yeah. And I spoke about the process, and so for some people the process would be easier, and for some it would be slightly tedious, and for some others it would appear initially to be just downright impossible.
Yeah. Well, quite often this word impossible is bandied around a little bit too often. Quite often it's difficult, but not impossible. But people will say, oh, it's impossible for me to change my diet, or it's impossible for me to give up smoking. Well, I've heard that a few times, and I've seen patients along the way that I've said, as using that as an example, I can't give up smoking. I've tried smoke enders, I've tried this, I've tried the various programs that are on the market, but they only have to get lung cancer. Yeah. And you find how quickly they can give up smoking. And heart disease, heart disease is another one. I can't lose weight. I've tried every diet under the sun. I've been on all of these programs. I only have a heart attack, and you'll find quickly them out pounding the streets, losing weight, adapting to new lifestyles. So it's not impossible. Yeah. Difficult, perhaps.
Perhaps, yeah. And it's sad that we need to be brought to that point to make us realize that we need to change our lifestyles.
Exactly. And that's part of why I've like to share this information, is that one doesn't want to wait until the symptoms occur. The body's a very clever thing. It will often present you with a state of what we call dis-ease, where you're just not quite firing on all your cylinders. I often describe it as your get up and go has got up and gone. You just don't wake up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you find that there's some fatigue, and perhaps your digestive system is not working quite right, and perhaps you've got some headaches, and there's back pain or neck. Those are warning signs. Those are the states of dis-ease. And if one just suppresses those states by either taking medication or following another track, people turn to all sorts of things these days to suppress symptoms, including alcohol and poor diet, and the list goes on and on. But if you don't get to the cause and the root of those things, eventually they will become disease. You'll have frank disease. And once the body gets to that point, very often it's very difficult to return, if not impossible. Then definitely, once you've had the heart attack, there's damage. And that is very often not repairable. Yeah,
and it's difficult to make a comeback after that.
Absolutely.
Kevin, you also talk about the University of Life, also another term which is used these days, but obviously meaning, again, different things for different people.
Absolutely. Well, my idea is that when one is contemplating a pregnancy between husband and wife, that is the process of determining whether one is going to actually arrive at the situation where a fetus gets into the process of registration for the University of Life. So while the pregnancy is on track over those 9 months, a lot of things can happen. It's not plain sailing very often. We know that the occurrence of miscarriages is very high. So one doesn't enter the actual University of Life until the birth process. But that gestational period, while the pregnancy is on the go, is a very crucial time. And the fetus needs to be prepared for the university of life. And the responsibility for that, again, now falls squarely into the lap of the mom.
Yes.
To make sure that her diet is correct, her emotional state is stable.
Once again, she has the responsibility
Quite
of
right,
carrying that
quite
fetus.
right. And what is often not realized is that when the pregnancy is there, the baby is also subjected to all of these stress hormones that are produced in response to managing this thing called life. So if the mother is subjected to trauma of whatever kind, emotional, physical, it doesn't have to be severe trauma, in terms of major factors, but just ongoing issues with financial problems or work-related problems or home
Anything's
problems.
going to have an impact.
Correct. Will
on her
upregulate, will cause the body to produce lots of different chemicals. And the baby will then, or the fetus at that point, will then be subjected and influenced by those chemicals. And will start it off with a less than perfect opportunity to be totally successful, using my definition of success in life.
And of course, by that time, she's setting herself up to have a very difficult birth, and then also to have a difficult child once the child is born.
Absolutely. We now know that the messages that the fetus receives during that pregnancy process are crucial to the way it develops through its life. So it is absolutely critical that the mother is very well bathed in all the good stuff of life. And as I say, once the baby is born, you then enter the university as such. And initially, of course, you start off with some of the very simple classes that one has to go through, is just learning when to eat and how to eat, how to suckle, that sort of thing. Very simple processes. But that university process actually never ends until one dies.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure we've all been aware of older folk in the 80s, maybe perhaps grandparents, that have said, my goodness, I didn't know that at the age of 85. I'm never too old to learn.
So we're constantly learning.
Absolutely. Constantly being subjected to new lessons of life.
There are of course some of us who think we know it all. We've learned it all.
Absolutely. And that brings us perhaps to an interesting concept of the ego. The ego is something that is often very powerful and very dominant in one's life. In fact, there are 4 stages of development that are quite interesting. The first stage is what's called the athlete. And this is the time when the individual is at school, and it's a time when you often want to be in the A team. You want to be one of the really hip group. You want to be in the top group in the school. You want to be a prefect. You want to shine. And the individual learns lessons and starts to push the envelope quite substantially during their school life. And then you go into the second phase, which is called the warrior. Not I am worried, but the WARR, like the Indian warrior as such. And that's the time from when you leave school, and that process can last for years and years and years. And in fact, one might never get out of that time of being the warrior. And it's a very egotistical phase of one's life. It's about me and what I can get out of life. And very often it's a time of unhappiness where relationships break up because of conflict within the relationship, because the one doesn't want to hear the other, and it's competition. There's constant competition. Now, a certain amount of that is good, because that's drive, that's the positive
Keeps
ego.
us on our toes.
Absolutely. It's ambition and it's drive, and it's helping you to be successful in your life. But it can also be pathological when it's at the expense of other people. It's just get. I have to constantly.
Yeah, then you're climbing over people to get to the next rung of the ladder.
Yes, and you very often find during that time feuds occur in families. Parents don't speak to children, and children don't speak to parents, and siblings don't speak to each other. And very often it's right on one's deathbed that you suddenly start to realize that now you've got no friends and there's nobody there to support you.
Tragic.
Because your ego has been so dominant that you've actually pushed people further away from you than drawn them to you.
And you know, Kevin, what I always say is that the ego is one thing, the selfishness is one thing, but the realization or the non-realization of the fact that you are selfish and egotistical is even a greater tragedy.
Absolutely.
Because you don't think that there's anything wrong
Absolutely.
with what you're doing and the way you're behaving.
Yes, you're quite right. And that's the problem, that the ego doesn't hear very well. It offers information out all the time about how important the individual is. But listening is not a great skill of someone that is dominated by the ego.
True, very true. And we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Kevin Lentin, who is, as I was saying earlier, a chiropractor, health and lifestyle consultant, as well as an intermediate life support paramedic. And we're starting today a new monthly series entitled Your Life, Your Choice. Big question mark. On CCFM 107.5. It's great to have you tuning in. Dr. Kevin Lentin's life journey, has brought him to the place now where his 25 years of clinical experience in the health and wellness world have led him into the realm of behavioral analysis. A greater percentage of his time is now spent in corporate training in such fields as behavior modification, lifestyle modification, self-communication, preventative wellness, and stress management. His calling now is to communicate the many and varied techniques that he has learned to show people how to function at their optimum potential and release the shackles, I love this expression, preventing expression of their full potential. From today then, and God willing continuing on a future regular monthly basis, Kevin will be sharing his unique blend of experience as a chiropractor, clinical nutritionist, and psychology graduate, which positions him perfectly as a wellness expert to guide and enhance performance and productivity within organizations in a series called Your Life, Your Choice? ? And the theme for our talk today is responsibility.
Yes, thank you. We have spoken about that a little bit. And just to reiterate that the buck does stop with each of us. We have to actually take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and make a decision that we want to age healthily. Now, that is sometimes a bit of a concept that people don't.
Yes,
yes. Believe it or not, I have actually had patients along the way that have been terminally ill with cancer that I would have determined that they are actually healthier than some of my other patients. Now, that seems, as you say, a contradiction. But if we go back to this concept of success and that state of inner peace, which should, I think, be our ultimate goal, a state of complete and utter inner peace. And then the body will respond to that by the most appropriate expression of what it wants from life, essentially. So those people that are terminally ill have got to that point of inner peace in spite of their particular situation. They understand why they're in the state that they're in. They're not fighting life anymore. They're not experiencing any forms of conflict and guilt and anger. They've just come to a place of inner peace. And that will, in and of itself, generate a state of health, interestingly enough. So if one looks at that formula for success, I spoke about the desire, having the desire to just age healthily. Perhaps that might be one's desire. To go through this process, and there's a very technical name called senescence. That is the word S-E-S. Now you've got me.
All right.
S-E-N-S-E-S-E-N-C-E. Senescence.
Senescence. I see what you mean. All right.
And that is the process of aging healthily. So you have the desire to do that. It takes a bit of work, as we've said, and the work might be changing one's diet, doing some exercise, reading the right kind of material, trying to improve one's knowledge about how to stay healthy.
And it can be something small, Kevin, can it not be? We always think it needs to be a huge change to start off with.
Absolutely. And that's very often why people say that things are impossible, as we talked about earlier, is that they see it as this huge mountain. But there's that lovely little saying, how do you eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time. And you will get through the whole elephant. It might take a while, but you will actually get through this. So take small steps, but find out what are the steps. That's the most crucial thing. Do the appropriate reading. And today we are so fortunate with the internet resources that we have, and with any magazine that you pick up that is health related will have all sorts of articles and information about how to stay healthy, or certainly get from that state of dis-ease to a state of complete ease and therefore health. And of course we said that you've got to do some work, as we've discussed, and it takes responsibility. We've discussed that. But overlying that whole thing is change. And change is perhaps for the human one of the most difficult things to do. We often fight against change. There's so many examples where they'll be putting up a new shopping mall in a particular area, and there will be an outcry from everybody about this is going to happen, more traffic, more this and that and the other. 5 years down the line, you can't get people out of the shopping mall because they've adapted to it and they've come to terms with the situation.
Yeah. The stadiums for the Soccer World Cup is a classic example, our classic examples.
Yes. And interesting you should mention that. I had so many patients, in the early stages when it was being mooted, and it would come in what was flavour of the month at that particular, flavour of the day at that time. The stadium, how's it going to impact and everything? Why are they doing it? Now, since we've had the rugby and the particular events that they've had there, the soccer event as well, yes. I've had so many say, isn't it fantastic? Gee, it's so great. It's so wonderful. I've had so many positive responses. So that's how we do. So change is important, and I'm sure most people now have heard the definition of insanity.
What is it?
And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and hoping for a different result.
Ooh.
So if one keeps doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you've got.
Absolutely.
So change is important. And oftentimes it's the fear of change. But if one speaks to the right kind of people, reads the right kind of books, and involves themselves in the right kind of situations, you will find that life is actually not so difficult.
Kevin, and just listening to you talk, expectation is another thing. I mean, we were having a chat the other day, and somebody was saying, really, and this they had heard from someone else, that if you're going to expect nothing out of life, or from life, or if you're not going to expect your negative circumstance to change, that's exactly what you're going to get.
Absolutely.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Zero.
That's exactly right. Absolutely. And so one has to think of that concept of expectations very carefully. Because if you have certain expectations and they're not met, then disappointment sets in. And disappointment is one of those things that will upregulate those chemicals that I was talking about earlier, those stress chemicals, if you like, that will impact on the body's general state of health.
Yeah. And of course, may I add, realistic expectations, not expecting to sort of win millions by tomorrow morning.
Absolutely.
Kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Having realistic expectations.
Yeah. Again, it comes back to that concept of success. What is your expectation for life? It is different for everybody, as we've said, but sitting down and doing the plan of your life is very important. Setting goals, for example, is important.
Kevin, we focus much, and rightly so, on the physical, but there are some of us who don't realize how big an impact the mind has on the physical body.
Absolutely, and you're so right in saying that. And it again draws me to the analogy of the two parts of one's brain. Essentially, we have what's called the subconscious brain, and we have the conscious brain. Now, the subconscious brain is actually about 1 million times stronger than the conscious brain. And the subconscious brain, initially from the time we enter that university, which is from the time of birth, the subconscious brain is actually empty. It's really a huge hard drive, if one understands that concept of a computer that has a hard drive that really just stores information. Whatever you put into the hard drive remains exactly as it is in that hard drive. And that's what the subconscious mind is like. So as you program the subconscious mind through the lessons that you learn in the University of Life, the subconscious mind retains all of those memories and experiences. It's a never-ending, infinite capacity to store information. And that information, that programming, is essentially how we run our lives. That's the operating system for our life. The conscious brain, then, is 1 million times smaller than the subconscious. So as one starts to accumulate experience into the subconscious, you start then to be able to use your conscious brain to determine how you're going to express your life. So one is subjected to multitudes of stimuli through the day. As wherever you go, sight, sound, voices, people saying things, what you see, all of that kind of stuff is a stimulus that's coming in to the conscious brain. And the conscious brain then has to make a decision as to how it's going to do with that information.
Absolutely.
It then goes into the subconscious brain. And it says, okay, tell me now, have I experienced something like this before? And obviously this is happening instantly. It's almost in nanoseconds that this process happens. It goes into the storage folders or files in the subconscious, and it says, okay, how do I react to this? Do I get happy? Do I get sad? Do I cry? Do I laugh? Do I become angry? What do I do? And so it depends on how that subconscious brain has been programmed, because we will always express through the conscious the way the subconscious has been programmed. Now, interestingly, as I said, from birth, that subconscious is empty. And if, for example, the parents keep saying to their children or their babies at that stage, "Oh, you're such a naughty little thing," or "You stupid," in a very loving way, the baby, because it has no experience for the different sound or tone in the voice, doesn't know. It just picks up, "I'm stupid," or "I'm naughty." And that happens time and time and time again. And so eventually there's some kind of the way that we, if we're subjected to a stimulus through our life by a teacher or by a mentor or by anybody that pricks that kind of programming, we then experience that in the way we behave. So things like self-confidence and self-worth and self-esteem all come from that original programming. And sometimes some people will say that high self-worth, self-esteem is even more important than one's academic prowess.
So coming back to responsibility, as an individual, you have a responsibility in terms of what you accept, what you take in, and what you decide to do with that information that you take in. And then, of course, as a parent or as a sister, as a sibling, you also have the responsibility of deciding how that information is going to be dealt with.
Absolutely. The unfortunate part is that for the first approximately 6 odd years, the conscious brain is very inactive because you don't have much experience. So you can see young children at the age of 5 or 6, they'll still run into the traffic. They'll still walk on a wall that is dangerous because they haven't quite got the concept yet of depth perception or the danger. So they will still do things that perhaps are dangerous for them because they haven't retained that kind of information. So in those first 6 years, the programming that you receive, you're not in control of. And that's where very often in those formative years the damage is already done. So even though at the age of 20 you might now say, well, I should feel better about myself, I should have more confidence, those first 6 years could have squashed that. And then it becomes more of a difficult process to reprogram. Unfortunately, we don't have a delete button like the computer. Delete that program, get version 2, plug it in, and it just works perfectly. We don't have a delete button. We can only reprogram, which takes oftentimes different approaches, whether it's meditation, whether it's neurolinguistic programming, whether it's yoga, whether it's life coaching, whether it's having input from a psychologist. All of those kind of things help to then reprogram. But that is an ongoing process.
And we can be so grateful to a wonderful God who's made us and created us the way He has.
It's absolutely amazing to me, even though I've been in this business now for 25 years and read thousands and thousands of pages of all of this, I still don't understand just how the true intercellular communication happens between one cell and another, how this body actually talks to itself, and that is definitely as a result of the Master who has created that.
And so we need to respect our bodies.
Absolutely.
And we really do, and we need to look after our bodies so that we can age well.
Age healthily.
Age healthily, that's the term. And the term you used is senescence.
Senescence.
Aging healthily. You've got a website, Dr. Lentin.
Yes, I'm very proud of my new website that has just gone live a week or two ago. For anybody that might be interested, it's www.doctor, that's Dr. Kevin, Kevin, Lentin, Lentin.co.za. That's all one word, Dr. Kevin Lentin. And there is, you can sign up for a newsletter, so I'm hoping to accumulate email addresses that I can then forward all of this kind of information on an ongoing basis, just to help often bring people back on track again.
Indeed. And for those who don't have access to email, you don't want to leave a telephone number or anything like that?
Yes, certainly people can contact me. My work number is 021 674 0548. I repeat, 021 674 0548. The unfortunate thing with a lot of this information, there's often no quick answer. It's not a quick thing that you can just say, oh yes, I could just do this, that and the other, and you'll be fine. It often does require exploration and coming to an understanding of that subconscious programming.
And because it's taken you 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years to get to the point where you are, it is certainly not going to take a day or a night or 2 days to get to where you ought to be.
Quite right. And that is something I often see in the clinic, where perhaps one of the most common things that I hear from patients is, I thought it would go away. So we live with things for way too long, thinking that the body will do its thing and it'll improve, and perhaps we suppress it with medication for a while, and eventually it gets to the point that you have to do something about it. Then you want it taken away within a visit or two.
And also it then surfaces in the interim at the most inappropriate times, in the most inappropriate ways.
Quite right. That state of disease often, as I say, becomes disease and will then manifest as, whether it's eczema or an ulcer or a heart disease or something even worse, it will eventually come out some way.
Indeed. Thanks, Kevin. Till
Thank
next
you.
time. Hey, thanks for the information.
Thank you very
and so
much.
those details once again for Dr. Kevin Lentin. His website is www.dr, that's short for doctor obviously, so it's drkevinlentin, lentin.co.za, and then his office landline number 021 674 0548.